Okay, let's kick on into it. I'm going to do the
Right.
full intro because I'll definitely include that in, and just feel like us having a usual chat anyway.
Yes.
Okay, it is a personal pleasure to welcome Emma Watson to this Her Career Leader-led Conversations Over Coffee event to share her experience and insights with us, not only on this call, but forever online for all to learn from. So no pressure at all, Emma. I met Emma at the end of 2009 when I made my first career pivot and secured an account manager role with CCH New Zealand, who are now Wolters Kluwer. In the 4 years where our working lives overlapped, Emma always impressed me as an inspiring female leader, someone who was knowledgeable, professional, calm, solutions-focused, fair, logical, and who also had an amount of emotional intelligence and humility, while supporting, advocating for, and celebrating her largely female leadership team. Emma started her career in the native UK in accountancy and immigrated to New Zealand with her first role being at CCH, where she spent over 13 years across 3 key roles. Now at Fronde, where initially employed as a consultant, you've been promoted 3 times in your nearly 7 years there and is now their COO. This to me obviously speaks volumes about your work ethic and abilities. With experience to share around failure, humility, patience, feeling the fear and doing it anyway, putting your hand up and having questions, not answers, you bring a human face to developing an esteemed career as a woman across business performance, strategy, finance and governance in finance, publication, marketing and technology sectors. I'm sure you'll have many inspired and empowered moments from our time together. And also, as a bit of housekeeping, I also encourage anyone who has joined the meeting to use the chat function for questions. We may run out of time to address these here, but Emma has kindly agreed to provide response in writing, and we'll post these in the related article when the video is released. So Emma, thank you again for being here, and I will let you now take the floor.
Thank you very much, Rosie. It's a lovely introduction. Thank you. I think I tried to think about how to sort of put this down, and I decided to choose to talk about my career journey in kind of 5 stories, as Rosie's touched on. So firstly, failure. So exams hadn't been a problem for me in the early part of my life. I was quite fortunate I was able to cope with that kind of format. And I'd always been able to get through with quite a minimum of sort of last minute prep. But when I got to year 13, that approach stopped working. So my grades in the science subjects I was doing were so poor that I ended up having to watch most of my cohort go off to uni while I stayed back and retook those subjects. So the learning here is for all of us, and I know many of us have had these moments, something good always comes out of those challenges. First positive for me was I decided to make a real shift from science to business. And this came out of a really random conversation with a guy that was interviewing me for a supermarket Saturday job. He asked what I was studying and he said, "Why don't you be an accountant? They earn lots of money." And that sounded pretty good to me at the time, and so off I went. And fortunately, I loved business, and it's worked out really, really well. But perhaps most importantly, this failing experience has really given me something to prove. And as a result, a lot of determination and drive. And actually, to be honest, that sense of something to prove probably still hasn't gone away even after 30 years. Just something I have to keep aware of. So second story is humility and patience. So when I arrived in New Zealand, I was 30. I was probably at the peak of my certainty and conviction in life, and I'd worked in London. My CV looked good. I'd worked in really big companies, great names, and amazing experience, or so I thought. And arriving here was pretty confronting, actually, because companies weren't exactly falling over themselves to employ me. So it was a wee bit of a sort of reality check, and it was quite a shock. And I spent the first few months actually really, I remember just being, I arrived in October and it was raining a lot. And I just remember turning up at interview after interview feeling like really bedraggled. And it just took a while to find a job. And I worked in a lot of cafes and bars, and I actually had an enormous amount of fun. Now, when I got my first contract gig, which was actually just prior to working at CCH, I worked in a law firm, and I was their financial controller, and this was a total sideways move for me from what I'd done before. And the only thing I can say really is, and there were a couple of sideways moves for me, but I just learned so much about myself while I was there. And as an accountant in a law firm, you are very much like the second class professional, I guess. And it was made very clear really that the main business was not accounting, it was legal. And really, it really taught me how I had to put my own ego aside and just build relationships to get my job done. And I worked with the most amazing CEO, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to work with him. He was probably one of the best leaders I've ever encountered, and it was working for him that really gave me an enormous amount of leadership skill, I guess. He was one of those people that always made time. He always looked really pleased to see you, however busy he was. And he valued and acknowledged my work. And they say that people don't remember what you say to them, but they will remember how you make them feel. And I remember him because he made me feel amazing. And that's been a huge guide to me as to how I try to be with other people. And I don't probably always achieve it, but it still guides me, and it still guides me absolutely to this day, and particularly actually when I'm stressed about something. So the third,
before you jump into the third,
yeah.
I know that in that humility and patience piece, because you spoke a little bit about coming to New Zealand and then what was the relevant New Zealand experience you had. So I think just sharing a little bit about that idea of relevant experience and what you can do to show transferable skills or any other messaging that you would share.
Yeah, I think to some extent you've got to be focused on what is the job, what is it that needs to get done, not what is it that I can do or what is I think I should do. And so, I mean, for example, I'll just share with you, I sort of thought, well, I've got a huge amount of experience in publishing because that's what I did. So I sort of wrote to all of writing was a thing at the time, by the way. We did cover letters and they got sent in the post. And so I write to companies and say, oh, look, this is me and this is my experience. What I didn't do is translate that to the problems that those people were, may or may not have. And so it probably just came across pretty arrogantly, I would imagine. And so in terms of the people would say things like, well, you haven't had any experience of doing a New Zealand GST return, and that being a very specific comment that was made. And probably not tutting and thinking, well, isn't it obvious that that's exactly the same as what I've been doing, but just being prepared to paint that picture is probably the key thing there, Rosie.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's because you're stuck in it, it's very obvious, those links. And I think we talk a lot about how to ensure that the people that are either looking through a CV really quickly or just having an initial phone conversation with you, that you've thought out that problem from their perspective, which shows you have a diversity of thought to do that for their customers as well. Because if you can make that link and really stand in the different angles of how people face that and what they need to achieve, it holds you in good stead in so many ways. So yes, please do continue.
And I think And then the third story was kind of around the pivotal moments where you get an opportunity, and I call it feel the fear and do it anyway. Because if I fast forward 4 years, and by then I was at CCH, I had 2 children, so lots gone on in my life, and I was in my role at CCH, felt like another sideways move, but it was about to get very, very interesting and become like the hugest learning curve in my career. And I was financial controller at CCH, and I was in I'd always made it my business, I guess, to be really, really focused on what the business was and not what the role was. Just be really passionate and interested about what we were trying to do, not just be focused on what was happening in finance. And anyway, as was the case at the time, I'd go to a regional finance meeting in Sydney. And I was there at one of these, and the CEO of Asia Pacific popped his head around the door and asked me to step out. I was a bit alarmed, followed him down the corridor to the meeting room to find that my boss, who was the managing director of the New Zealand business, was in the room with him. And she'd been promoted to run the business in Australia. And they just asked me, they just said, oh, they were going to move me into being the country head role. Now, I mean, it's kind of funny, really, because I don't recall this being a discussion at all in any shape or form. And the next thing I know, I was being taken out to lunch, and I was thinking, well, shouldn't I tell someone I'm not coming back into the, into that regional meeting? But I mean, apart from that particular experience, it was, I kind of wanted a role like that. The irony is that I would never have applied for it. And secondly, I remember asking my new boss what he wanted me to do. And he said, don't do anything. You just listen, just ask questions and observe. At which point I was sort of almost beside myself with fear, because doing person, an action person, somebody that was very, very clear about what it is that my role entailed, and all of a sudden there was this huge, big greenfield opportunity. I was absolutely terrified. And it kind of got worse over the next few weeks. We had the Commerce Commission on our backs, something we published. We had a joint venture that was going south. We had some customer service problems as a result of an initiative that I had no control over, our business had no control over. And so it was a total baptism of fire. And as is usual, I found out quite a few things out of this particular experience anyway. That I can thrive when things are tough. It provides some real focus in a crisis, right? To be laser focused. You've got a real burning platform and a reason to be brave. And I found out actually I can be really calm and I can be really focused. And secondly, you have to share your problems. That was the other thing for me, was actually to go out and get advice, get support, and just not be afraid to share that with other people that could help you. And to realise that I didn't have to fix all that on my own was huge. Was really, really huge for me. And that
where do you think the calm comes from? Because I mentioned that even in the introduction.
Yeah.
And, so you mentioned that, you do have this sense of calm in a crisis, and many strive for that, not always achieving. Where does that come from, Emma? It
comes from, I think, being really, I think sometimes in a crisis you get real clarity on what you're really there for, and that has always worked for me in terms of being a calming influence, because your problem becomes crystal clear, or your objective becomes crystal clear, and it removes the peripheral noise. And some people might talk about it as urgent and important, and what's important comes to the fore, and therefore you actually sometimes have almost, it's not that you have less to do, but you can see so much more clearly what you really need to do, or sorry, which area you really need to focus on. I mean, that's kind of one aspect of it. I mean, the other thing again is to share. The calmness comes from that ability to share that with others and to work with others and to feel that you're part of a team as well, that's solving that helps with it. Yeah, it's a really hard one to answer, Rosie.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I know
Yeah.
Michaela's got a question too. We might keep that till the end to see if we can write that in as well, because it's aligned. But I love her take on that decision fatigue. We want to make sure we get the last two of your stories in before we hit the questions. I'll let you get back to it.
So the fourth one is around putting your hand up. And again, I mean, I know this is probably maybe a slightly obvious one, but probably the take on it, the learning for me around this is kind of quite specific. So if I fast forward again, so I'm still at CCH at this point. So I'm in a pretty stable position by now. I've been doing the role leading the New Zealand business for about 4 years. So I know the role pretty well. I've got a really awesome team around me at this point. And we were delivering what we needed to deliver on. And I could see that there was a really critical, we were about to launch a new platform which was going to provide a better way of our customers accessing the content that we published online. And it's a critical project. It's a critical project for the region, for the whole of the Asia Pacific region, but also it's a really critical project for our customers in New Zealand. And I could see that it wasn't going very well. It didn't seem to have a leader. And there was about 3 different departments based in the Australian part of the business who were working on this. And the other units, if you like, in Asia and in New Zealand were sort of being asked for input, but there wasn't really anything coming together, or so it seemed. And so I knew it wasn't going to go well if I just kept on banging on about the fact that there was a problem here. So what I did was I positioned that problem in a way that, and I offered to step in to lead it. And I think the nuance here was, and I guess the learning piece is I knew the business well. I also knew, and I think this is the learning, and this is the thing I would advise anybody in the early stage of their career to do, because I don't think I did it in my career early enough, was to understand how my role and my job was impacted by other people's roles and other people's jobs. And I know that sounds really easy to say, but wherever you are, you've got somebody who relies on you in order to do their job. You've also got colleagues and peers who are going to need, or they're going to have desires and wants and wishes of their own. And by being able to pull together that knowledge to say, I can help solve this problem and help solve your problem, all of our problems, I was able to get support for that. And then also it went on then to lead a regional team to deliver a really good outcome. I think the key is that knowing your colleagues and knowing what they need from you. And it was a really good opportunity for me, because I wasn't qualified to lead programs. I didn't have project management experience and program management experience, but I was known in the organisation. And so the other thing is the best development opportunities come from often within your own organisation. And I know I often am tempted to think, I need to go and get another job. But actually sometimes you can get such a huge opportunity and a shift in gear in your career from doing something where you already are. And it does require you working out how you're going to work with the other people around you. so they get something out of it as well. So that brings me on to my last one, which is called questions and not answers. Because in my next role, notwithstanding everything I've just said, I had in my next role, this was my third role in the CCH environment, I had a new boss, and he asked me to bring together a new approach for the whole region in go-to-market strategies, new concept for the business. And I thought, oh yeah, I can do this. I did that before with the publishing platform. And I talked to some of my colleagues and I asked them to nominate people I could work with and bring together this team. I then launched into doing all this research and developing this framework, and I was really proud of it. I thought it was really logical. I thought it was really clear. And then when we started to implement it, it just didn't get any traction. It gradually withered and died, and nobody in that organisation would ever know it had ever even been mooted. And I think when I look back, right, it's actually embarrassing how obvious that outcome was.
Hindsight, Emma, hindsight. Yes, that's why they call it that.
I had absolutely failed to bring anyone with me. I hadn't gathered any support. I hadn't asked questions. I just assumed I knew exactly what the solution was. I'd researched it pretty much on my own. I'd completely failed to engage a team of people who had asked for, their help and their support. And I just effectively told them what the solution was. So, and I guess this one, I'll end on this one, because asking questions and not giving answers is probably the one that I'm still trying to do. This is still, I think, where I can have the biggest impact. And I think, I've started doing a little bit of board work, and it's even more critical at this point. You don't hire a management team if you're going to do the managing yourself. And I suppose that sort of learning of being right, being smart, doesn't really matter if you are or not. If there's nobody else with you, there's no point. So I guess that's the other learning is asking the questions and not feeling the need to provide all the answers.
Yeah, I love that. The way that you put it earlier about allowing others to have their own epiphany. Because yes. You can only aha yourself. You can be led to it.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
So
we do have a few minutes, and I would love to start with Michaela's question, which is around in those moments of chaos and crisis, how do you not get decision fatigue, and how do you start that delegating process when it feels so huge or unachievable?
So again, in the context of a team working together, I would share the problem early. I think how do you not get decision fatigue? I think you have to, and I do use tools like urgent and important. I use that in all the time in trying to think through what needs to get done today. And as I say, sometimes that's actually bizarrely easier in a crisis situation, because the important isn't even remotely, generally much clearer actually than it is on a day-to-day basis when you find yourself doing, trying to do everything. And so decision fatigue, I think stems from that, when you haven't got the clarity over the urgent and the important. I
Yeah,
don't
I
know
think that's
if that answers it. That's how it feels to me anyway when I'm doing it.
No, Michaela thinks that is a great answer. I do have a couple of other questions we've received. So I know you mentioned a couple of times as to where you were in your career and motherhood, where you were at different stages of that with your children. How has that affected your career and the decisions that you've made?
So I've been really, really fortunate in every environment that I've worked in has been very empowering and helpful from the point of view of being able to, there's never for me, I'm very, very lucky, never been this suggestion that, that there's never been the tension within coming from the work environment. The tension for that has tended to come from me.
Yes.
And myself. But so
I know you've got a great story around timing with that too.
Yes. So
part of what I was leading to.
yeah. And so I remember between I arrived at CCH just after I had my first child, and probably it would have been about a year later. Obviously, I fell pregnant with my second child. I was working there, and it was hilarious, really, because working with my boss, and she was female. She was the managing director of the business before me, and we were having a one-on-one, and she said, "Look, I've got something to say, Emma. I've got something to ask you." She said, and I knew that she was expecting a baby at that time, and but I didn't know what was coming next. And she said, "Oh, look, I'd really love you to, I'm actually probably only going to take 3 months maternity leave, and I'd love you to cover that for me. You know, are you up for that?" And at this point, I was just at that critical stage when you're not quite telling people, but I was also pregnant at that time, and so it was just a hilarious conversation of, well, I'd love to, but it can only be 3 months, and I can't guarantee knowing that knowing how babies make their own timing, but I'm up for it if you are. And so that was just a sort of one of those things. So I did her mat leave, only to go very quickly onto mat leave myself. And luckily, our babies both played ball, and the timing actually worked out just fine.
I think that's a perfect story to end on. We've got one more minute, but I think in terms of a number of the conversations I hear from mentees and women early in their career wondering how to plan around pregnancy, that story was just really empowering, that you have one pregnant managing director talking to someone who is newly pregnant, and the leadership and empowerment that comes from that, and the different conversations. Are there any more questions on chat before we round off that I can add into the list for Emma? I'll give anyone a few seconds just to type up if they have anything. Otherwise, I just really want to thank you for spending this time and sharing those incredible stories and insights from what is an amazing career, Emma, and thank you again.
Oh, thank you very much, Rosie, and really happy.
I've lost your audio.
Oh,
you're not on mute, but I've lost your audio. I'm not sure if anyone else can hear you. Great.
Okay.
We might round off there then.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Have a great day.